Hello and welcome to Imagine Festival 2021 and to this special video recording of the Duncairn Podcast. My name is Colin Hazard and I am the writer in residence for the Duncairn Arts Centre. For those of you who don't know, the Duncairn is an arts centre, obviously, based in North Belfast, whose mission is to inspire communities, develop audiences and strengthen the sector. As you may have noticed from my background, I am not in the Duncairn this evening, but I am rather in the luxurious surroundings of my spare bedroom. But this is where, for the past 6 months or so, I have been hosting the Duncairn Podcast. And on that podcast, I have been chatting with various artists and performers from across the island of Ireland about art, their creative process, and generally finding out about them and their lives. And the Duncairn and myself are delighted to be involved with Imagine Festival to bring you this special video edition. And indeed, thank you to Peter O'Neill and the Imagine Festival team for allowing us to be part of such a great calendar of events that they've organised in these unusual and challenging times. This evening's podcast discussion is with Ciaran Harper and Raquel McKee. Ciaran is a mixed media artist working primarily with oils on canvas. His professional practice is comprised of mainly figurative paintings and composed of found imagery, which predominantly features those of Black and African heritage. Ciaran's mixed Irish and Caribbean roots play an important part in his ethnic-inspired artwork. His achievements include graduating university and being awarded the Carson Madole Prize for an outstanding piece of work, and working with Child Research International to raise funds with the climb of Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. More recently, Ciaran has had artwork exhibited in the Royal Ulster Academy and the Titanic Building, and was selected by the British Council to be part of a new narratives project and visit Rwanda last February. In October this year, Ciaran will be exhibiting a solo show in a gallery in Belfast for Black History Month. My other guest is Raquel McKee, who is a Caribbean-born poet, storyteller and actress living on the island of Ireland. Raquel is a repeated Arts Council of Northern Ireland awardee and has been commissioned to write for the National Lottery Heritage-funded Links and Legacy 400 project run by the African and Caribbean Support Organisation, Northern Ireland. Raquel has performed commissioned pieces at Gala NIA at Titanic Belfast, headlined at the Lit Up Open Mic Night, read at the Hillsborough and Eastside Arts Festivals, and in Dublin at Poetry Ireland for the Cross Borders Transition Showcase, amongst many other events. And in 2018, Raquel performed in the role of Asha in the Kibosh theatre production Lives on Translation, and has worked with Terra Nova Productions most recently on an online theatre performance called Injustice. Welcome to you both.
Thank you very much.
And if you don't mind, I'll start with Raquel and go right back to the start of your biography and ask about your Caribbean heritage and indeed how and why you swapped the Caribbean for Northern Ireland.
That's a hard one, Ciaran. Who would swap the Caribbean for Ireland? Who would? With sunshine like that? Yeah. But when you think about it this way, last night my mum and I were musing together. I was telling her, thank you for me being born. And she said, yes, who would have known back then that the 17th of March would have been significant? At that time, she didn't know there was such a thing called St. Patrick's Day, but that's the date on which I was born. So I think that has a level of significance. There might have been, some plan before me that I was going to have some connection with Northern Ireland. I have to say, the very first time that I flew in the airwaves of Northern Ireland, even before the plane touched down, I felt as though I had arrived home. Can't explain it, but that's what it is. So I think, yeah, I could see that God had his hand in this, planning in advance of me coming here. What brought me here? Love. One of those Northern Irish boys.
Those Northern Irish boys are only trouble, let me tell you.
Well, so it is.
And how long have you been living here now?
I've been living in Northern Ireland for probably about 17, 18 years. Moved to the UK before that, and then over to Northern Ireland. Yeah, when I was pregnant with my third child. Yeah.
Okay, well, I should say as well, belated happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I hope you had a good day yesterday.
I did, thanks. I did. Yeah, lovely weather for it yesterday.
Indeed. And then growing up, in Jamaica, were you always interested in poetry and the creative arts?
My father quoted Shakespeare My mother sang in weddings. She also had a scholarship for a drama workshop, and she then went on to be a children's TV program host, and also a teacher, which it so happens are things that I have also followed her footstep in. You know, I have done all of those things. But no, when I was very young, I wouldn't have said that I had had an interest in poetry at the very outset. I think my first recollection of connecting with literature and the arts in that way. Well, my mum also did community activities where she would teach young people to perform dances and so on. So I had connections with the arts in those ways. But my first time that I fell in love with literature was when I was in grade 5 in Jamaica, and my teacher, Hector Hemans, used to have this routine of bringing us into class after lunch, letting us put our heads on the desk, and he would read to us. I used to live for Jane Eyre. I just absolutely fell in love with literature when he did that. And I mean, about 5 years ago, I remember connecting with him on Facebook and just saying, "Sir, thank you so much for letting me fall in love with literature the way I did." So, you know, in those early days, you know, a lot of our curriculum was very much the British curriculum. And so I was learning things by H.A. Vaughan, Turn Sideways Now and Let Them See What Loveliness Escapes the Schools. That's a Welshman. And, you know, other literature of the sort at the time were, you know, from British writers. But by the time I got to secondary level school, we had extracurricular activities that allowed us to experience people like Louise Bennett Coverley and other Jamaican writers like Claude McKay and others. Then by the time we got to college, I was at college as a teacher training, and at that stage we got exposed to people like Maya Angelou, Langston Hughes, and you know, those were now part of the curriculum, no longer just the British writers anymore. So yeah, over time I think my interest in literature and love of poetry and love of the arts developed. Yeah.
That's great. And funny you mentioned Jane Eyre, because I also read that in secondary school, but I had quite the opposite reaction to it.
Hated it.
Yeah, I was putting my head down to fall asleep, but no, I think it's wonderful that you were able to then go and thank the teacher that had inspired you. And
Absolutely.
You know, I certainly have a teacher that inspired me into poetry, into English. So thank you for sharing those memories. And then turning back to Kieran now, in your biography, you mentioned the Caribbean and the Irish roots. And I also read somewhere, I believe, that you were born in Leicester in England. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
That's right, yeah. I was born in Leicester. And I think I must be living here at the same sort of time as Raquel then, about 18 years. So I moved over when I was about 10 years old from Leicester. Of course, born there. My dad is from Leicester, but his parents both from Jamaica. So my mum's she's from Armagh. So quite the contrast then. And that's the reason that we moved over closer to my mum's family. And so our whole family moved over.
And is Armagh where you moved back to?
No, I've moved down to near the Mourne Mountains, County Down.
Oh, really? Yeah. Whereabouts?
Kilcoo. Small village called Kilcoo.
Oh, I know it, because I'm a County Down man originally as well. I'm Banbridge, which is
a
bit of a bigger town. But
a family in Banbridge too, yeah.
Well, I would argue that's the best town in the north, but that's for another podcast. But no, my dad's actually from Dundrum, so I would have been around Kilcoo and around that part of the world quite regularly. And then, were you, like, I always have this idea that people who get into paintings and kind of visual art are the children who just are obsessed with crayons and paints and colors and just constantly drawing. Is that your case?
Yeah, I don't have any like major memories going back to my childhood of when I first started really, getting into art. Just really remember being quite creative, doing a lot of drawing, and that I think my mum and dad were quite into drawing. My mum did a little bit of painting. My dad used to do a bit of drawing as well. Used to draw his cars My mum used to do some portraits and that, so I think that's maybe where I've got it from. And yeah, just really picked up on me like that, and just carried it on through school, and then into secondary school. Whereas you were talking about getting read poetry and literature in school, I would be the same. I'd be putting my head down on the desk. I wasn't that too much into reading, but more about the spoken word or more listening to things, or watching things. So I'd be much more into drawing and that. So that's the kind of path that I took in school, and then later led on to going to do it for 3 years in tech, and then another 3 years university after that. Just felt natural for me to do. Yeah.
It is natural, did you say?
Yeah, it was just natural for me to do. I'd rather for my pictures to speak the words, than for me writing them or even speaking them out loud like I am now.
Well, a picture paints 1,000 words, as they say.
That's it. That's it. Yeah.
But as I always say with the poetry, why say in 10 words what you can say in 100? So I guess that's why we're very different.
Can I just throw something else in there, Colin? I was just thinking about, the foundations that have been laid for us, and like with your parents having that interest, Ciaran, in painting and arts and so on. And I'm just thinking back to how the Jamaica Cultural Development Commission played a big role in my love for poetry, because every year it would host a festival competition where boys and girls would be allowed to practice and perform pieces of poetry and do bits of drama. And then later on in the year, there was also a singing competition. And so even just that made a big deal, because I then learnt a lot of poetry, which I can still remember today. And I just really am grateful for that kind of input in my life.
And on that subject, Raquel, I know you have quite a few strings to your creative bow with the poetry, the storytelling, the music, the acting. But if we just stick with the poetry for a minute, what is your kind of creative process like in terms of where you create and how you create?
I would say that it differs. If I was doing what we call page poetry, I tend not to be as big into research when I'm doing page poetry. I tend to respond to the things around me or the things that I'm feeling. And usually, the thoughts will come to me and I'll start writing, and then I'll just edit as I'm going along. And then at the end, I'll redraft, and that would be typically the way it would work. But when I'm doing dub poetry, very often what happens is that a seed will be planted in my mind, and I'll go away and do a load of research, a whole lot of research. And while I'm doing that research, what will tend to happen is I'll be brooding over the topic. Dub poetry, for those of you who don't know, is Jamaican performance poetry, which very often has a strong rhythmic beat and almost always is social commentary oriented. So people like Louise Bennett Coverley, who I mentioned earlier, people like Linton Kwesi Johnson, people like Muta Baruka, etc., are proponents of dub poetry. So very often social commentary would be part of it. And so, I would be doing the research, I'd be brooding over the thing. And what would then tend to happen is I would come to the point where it would all just spill out onto the page. And very often almost fully formed with very little tweaking needed after that. Somewhere along that point, I would have got some kind of beat or rhythm that would kind of help drive the piece. But yeah, that's typically the process for me when I'm doing dub poetry, as of course against when I'm doing page poetry, where it just comes differently. Yeah.
That's quite interesting from my point of view. Obviously, I'm a writer as well, a poet. And that you're making that distinction between the page poetry and the spoken word poetry.
Yeah.
And just in terms of like the research, sometimes I have poems in my head for years.
Yeah.
Mulling around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just find that very interesting how different poets approach their subjects.
Yeah.
But then for Kieran in the painting and the visual arts, I know you're based in the Queen Street Studios in Belfast. So what is your kind of creative process like down there?
So yeah, that's where I'm calling from today. I'm here at the Queen Street Studios, and for me, as you see around, well, maybe you can't see. I'd like to even get you up to show about, but if there's canvases on the walls and bits of wood and that, and yeah, creative process really starts for me is if, a bit like Raquel was saying, if I just have an idea, if I hear something maybe in a song, could be even just the title of a song, I think, oh wow, that already stands out for me, and then I go in and do my research on that as well, and I just get as much imagery as I can together and kind of just to really push them together. A bit like, I would say, a bit like hip hop music, I suppose, in a way, whereas you get the sampling as it's, it's maybe songs and that from the 60s or 70s, and then mixed with something like the new culture, the graffiti style. Is kind of how I see the way I create my images as well. So I make all my own canvases most of the time, and yeah, it's just that process of getting something made on computer. I mean, for me, first works very well. I kind of like that mix match of things, kind of like sampling, and I do that on a collage. It'll be a digital collage. It's just putting images together, whatever ideas that I'm having flowing around in my head, and then from there, I translate that into a paint, blow it up from something this size up to 2 meters in size.
And is this something like you've always done on the computer, or is this just for the collage work?
So I suppose I think it's always kind of just originated from the computer. I always like to have a reference image. I never really just paint straight from my head. I really like being able to copy or imitate something and then put my own spin on it as well.
I always imagine just artists just like kind of experimenting on canvas, but to actually do it on a computer is something I hadn't never contemplated before.
That's it. Yeah. No, I think maybe I get nervous whenever I get the canvas. Sometimes you get a brand new fresh canvas. Maybe it's the same as whenever you get a fresh piece of paper. Putting that first word down on it, you think, oh no, I don't want to make mistakes. So it's just like whenever you're typing on the computer, you can go back, edit, change things. Whereas once you do something on a canvas, you're taking a lot more of a risk where you just ruin something. You want to go back and fix it.
I get that because usually every birthday or Christmas, somebody buys me a notebook, a really lovely notebook. And you can tell it's expensive, and you're going, I don't even want to write in this. It's so good. I don't want to ruin this notebook.
That's it. Yeah, I'm absolutely same. Even in my bag now, I've got a couple of notebooks, and all I've done in them is the first page of maybe scribbled a few notes in them. And I always think in my head, oh, I'm gonna have to do a notebook. I could just sit there, relax, do a few sketches, and that never works out like that for me.
Yeah.
No, I need to have something pretty set. Just go there for the day and just do it.
Mm. And just on the subject of the Queen Street Studios, where I know you're down there with about 30 artists or so.
Yeah.
What is like the kind of the working relationships like, the camaraderie between you? Is there do you look at each other's pieces and give feedback, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, tough at the minute with all the restrictions and that. There's you only really seeing people in passing, or maybe a little bit online. But I have 2 studio neighbours. I'm familiar with them. I'm friendly with one. She graduated with me. Her name's Rachel Law, and then Dan Ferguson on the other side. So they're both quite figurative artists as well, and definitely do get a bit of inspiration from the different colleagues in here. That's for sure. And it does really push and motivate you as well, because you can see how productive other people are, and you think, got to get there and put in the work. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think we all know that feeling. And Raquel, how have you found the experience within the poetry circuit?
It's been interesting. In some ways, there has been a lot of support and encouragement, more so now than when I started. One of the things, though, is that I'm writing in a genre that is not as familiar and not as respected, probably. Yeah, dub poetry is fairly new to quite a few people in Northern Ireland, and as a genre of poetry, doesn't seem to command the same kind of respect that various forms of page poetry will command. And I find it's tricky then, for instance, if people want to rate you or compare you or determine what your quality is, they don't quite know what to do with that. You know, how do they make that call? What do they judge you on? And so, for instance, I've found that there have been individuals who have tried to advise me about my dub poetry, based on page poetry techniques and standards. And I've had to grow into the level of confidence where I feel as though I know what this is supposed to be, and I know how it's supposed to come across. So yes, even though there is stuff that I can learn about poetry, and there is stuff that I can draw on to improve my dub poetry, I don't think somebody else who's not writing dub poetry is really going to be best placed to advise me. So that's been a bit tricky. And then, of course, there have been the little issues, for instance, of, you know, how do you get into some of the bigger venues, you know, with an art form that's not as respected or not, you know, not known as well. I remember when I was at Queen's, we were considering things like this and you know, wondering how do you get the country to diversify its art forms if they do not have a body of knowledge from which to base a judgment about how good a quality this new art form is. And we, you know, it's tricky, it's a bit difficult. So yeah, there is that. But I have to say, it has been lovely being part of Women Aloud, and recently John Hewitt Society. And, you know, it's been lovely being part of Kinsana, which is the African Caribbean Support Organization's group of artists. And, you know, just have other people endorsing your work, encouraging you, pushing you forward. I have to say, Joe Ricketts from ACSONI has been invaluable. He's the one who's really said, you can do this, go and do it. So that's been lovely, yeah.
Yeah, well, I can certainly speak from experience when I say that often spoken word poetry or performance poetry is looked down on. So
yeah,
I'm sure that you're finding the same thing as you mentioned there with dub poetry.
Yeah.
But it's great that it's changing, or you can feel it changing.
Yeah.
And you talked there about the understanding. So I'm going to just switch back to Ciaran for a second, because it was quite a few years ago actually now. I visited the Artist and Gallery in East Belfast, and quite by chance I discovered your exhibition, which is called Windrush. And as a little bit of background for those who don't know, the Windrush generation, as they're known, are the people who arrived in the UK from the Caribbean in the late 1940s and early 1970s, and who helped rebuild Britain after the Second World War. But then in 2017, there was the start of the Windrush scandal, where it came to light that many of these people had been or were detained, deported, denied human rights. And because of the failings of the UK immigration system, they were labelled as illegal immigrants and therefore denied access to healthcare, to bank accounts, to housing, and so on. And the whole scandal caused a huge condemnation for the UK government and led to radical reform of the immigration policy. So I saw this exhibition that you had painted called Windrush, and I have some of your paintings here, which will show on screen now. That people look through those, and some of the titles are, as you can see on the screen, Knockout, After School, The Glory of the New, and Bunker. But the first thing that struck me is just the paintings themselves, just how great they are in terms of the monochrome colors and the style, the content, just the way the faces are blurred and the use of lines and textures on it. But going back to that understanding that Raquel mentioned, like, what was your message behind this collection, or what inspired you to put these paintings together?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It came to me at the same time as the whole scandal was coming on. So I was actually started on that body of work, and I knew it was all going to be based around Windrush. and then it came out on the news, about the Windrush scandal. So just the timing of that, I just couldn't believe it. And for me, yeah, it's just the way my grandparents were both coming around on that same generation. They came around from Jamaica to England in the 60s, that was then. And you had, I was reading back at certain books that I had, all based on this kind of experience. They were, they just didn't get accepted by the British people, and there were race riots and that in the 50s. And then since you had like the carnival that has kind of emerged from that, carnival in London, kind of as like a response to those race riots in the 50s. Now it's the largest street carnival in Western Europe. So you can see how the ideas kind of shifted, the way more people are much more embraced of the different cultures. Coming from the place where I was from in Leicester, compared to where I moved to a small village, Kilcoo, Leicester was like a very multicultural city. Well, I think it's one of the most in the whole of England. Surely that and London. So it was that kind of experience for me, coming from a place with that other cultures happening, and then to a place called Kilcoo, or even this whole country in Ireland and Northern Ireland. There's not a lot of other Caribbean or even African people. You see it a lot more though in Belfast, in the built-up areas in the city, but you still have that sense of the otherness as well. I think that's what I was kind of portraying in my work. Is if you see the images there on screen, a lot of it's kind of monochrome. For me, I was kind of just a comment on how people coming over were defined as colored people, and they were the other. But I tried to just do my work in black and white to show that kind of history, or black and white and brown and white. So I think that's just how that works kind of spawned from there.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that personal connection you have to it. And what has the reaction been, or what was the reaction to that collection like?
Very well. I had work actually is in a collection for the British Arts Council. That one was actually featured. It was an image of my granny from Jamaica. So, and I just had another work. It was picked up by a collector in Boston. So that's my first piece of international work that I'd really sold. And that one was also featured in the RUA, the Royal Ulster Academy, there in 2019. No, yeah, 2019. That was, but yeah, no, it was good reaction from it. Like, got good feedback. The first solo show, so
excellent.
Big one for me.
Yeah, moving from strength to strength as well, following that. And I think for visual art, it's much easier to separate the artist from the painting, because there is that physical distance between the two. Whereas Raquel, you're on stage with the microphone and you're delivering the poem, and it's coming out of your mouth. Mm-hmm. So, how would you use your identity and even your race within your work? How is that infused together?
I have to say, for me, there is a lot of focus on race and identity in my work, especially in my performance poetry, because of course, social commentary lends itself to the freedom to talk about racial injustice. And one example is the performance Injustice, which picks up on the themes of racial injustice and reparations. And through poetry and movement, we have created a piece on terranovaproductions.net/in-justice for those who want to go and look for it. And in that piece, it gives an opportunity, it lends itself to talking about some of these really important but very personal issues surrounding race and identity. I mean, those of you who have watched it, you'll notice that I comment about my own personal experiences the experience my family has had with racial injustice and how we, the impact it has had on us. And of course, it leads on to lots of other very important questions. So yeah, in my work, I do have the opportunity to do that. And I have to say, I don't regret that. There are a number of writers who think you should divorce the artist from the art. And, there's a whole debate about whether the pronoun I should be in poetry. Personally, for me, poetry is personal and political. So it's a combination of both.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And then on that subject, I know that you read a poem at the Black Lives Matter March last year in Belfast with a poem called Time Come.
Yes.
And there was a very powerful and inspiring poem, but there was two lines in particular that I picked out, which were the nonchalance of systemic racism, and also we will not sit back in silence.
That's right.
So, I mean, what sort of feelings did the George Floyd murder and kind of the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement stir up in you?
I have to say, for me, somebody who has black skin, it was not again, because for a number of people, this was new. They were seeing this for the first time. But for people with black skin, this is our life. This is everyday reality for us. Every single week, you will have a video posted to you about, cheap black life. You look in the movies, and if anybody's going to be killed, it'll be the black guy first. If anybody's going to be put down, it'll be the black guy first. So that is part of the nonchalance of systemic racism, where it is such a part of the mindset that black lives don't matter, and that white people are superior is the mindset, and everything else kind of just comes out of that. So yeah, that's been a very, it was a poignant moment for me personally, especially when I noticed that the whole world was waking up to the fact that this is a reality, that this actually happens. And I really do feel as though it is a watershed moment. Time has come. Things are beginning to gain traction, and I am praying desperately that it continues and that things will change.
Yes, I hope you're right, as I'm sure everyone watching this will agree with that. And Ciaran, I hope this is a short no to the answer to this question, but on that kind of subject, have you experienced any, I don't know, I guess any systemic racism or any barriers within the visual arts world, do you feel, because of your heritage and your skin color?
No, I don't think I have. I don't think I have. I've experienced things very, very rarely, a bit of racism, but not in a kind of systemic way or anything that's held me back. That's all. For me, the only thing I can think of is definitely really a positive thing, but that's the way my work, I feel like it kind of stands out in a place like Ireland. So I think that as a positive thing, really, yeah.
Yeah, and even when you did your little tour of the studio there behind you, I saw a glimpse of Martin Luther King, a small portrait, and
yeah, oh yeah. Here, good eye. Yeah, it's a tiny little picture there. So yeah, of course, I got those inspirational black figures. Is actually the Martin Luther King and the Malcolm X side by side there. I actually completed them at the same sort of time as that movement in June 2020. As a kind of response to that. Of course, I'm just proud of that cultural heritage as well. Of course, that these are men from America. Of course, that's a similar experience. What the African British or Caribbean British would have experienced to the African Americans in that same sort of that time period in the 60s, which is kind of when this Windrush generation is that I refer to in my work.
Yeah, and I think probably both of you would agree that kind of within the arts community, and I'm glad that you said no to that question, by the way, but I think people would agree that within the arts community, we're kind of preaching to the converted because we are quite liberal and we're usually kind of, peace and love and understanding. What can we do to change racist attitudes on a wider scale, do you think? I know that's a big question, and it requires probably a big answer, but is there anything that we can do on a kind of a local level, do you think?
What do you want first?
Don't mind. Whoever's ready.
You take it off, Raquel, go for it.
Okay, I don't know if you want me to start, because if I start, you might not get me to stop. As you know, I'm a part-time teacher, so I have inside experience and an inside view on what's happening in the education system. And I have to say that I think is one of the major areas that needs radical overhaul in my estimation. The mindset of the education system at the moment is that Britain is the best and everything else is pale in comparison to it. And the way that the curriculum is taught with that ethos behind it. And I think that does not give room for equity and equality, and does not allow young minds to recognize and understand that I need you to be the better me. That concept of Ubuntu, which is such a deep and enriched and ingrained part of African thought, that lends itself to the community focus as against the individual focus that tends to happen in the UK. To me, as long as there is this individualistic mentality and the Britain is best and everybody else is kind of what's left, then the mindset, unless that mindset is changed, we will always have problems until the philosophy that holds one man superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. We're going to have the problem of racial injustice. Haile Selassie said it.
It's a very salient point, and thank you for making it so succinctly, despite your initial reservation that you would.
I do have lots more I could say, but.
Again, Kieran, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course, it's education, really. It's education. You're definitely seeing a lot more changes anyway in recent years, but I'm not too sure what it is like in school now, but I just remember, learning. I was from an old boys Catholic grammar school in Newry, so it was kind of one way of teaching, really. That kind of Catholic or Christian, and even just the history was only just really Irish or some British history, until you really get that kind of global, that kind of education of things that are going on in the wider things, in the world. Even when I was living in England, I could only remember learning the history about things that just don't really need to know about, like Henry VIII and how many wives he has, things like that. Yeah, I think you really need to learn about the history of slavery and other atrocities in the world and how it's going on even still today, is really what needs to be taught, as you see in other countries in Africa, in India, in Asia as well.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. There needs to be an understanding and an acceptance of that colonial past and a teaching of it to the younger generations.
I have to say though, Colin, it is a difficult topic. And Terra Nova's commission gave myself, Rosa Stewart-McCreary and Michelle Ashwood-Stewart, my two collaborators, gave us an opportunity to engage with a really difficult, thorny topic of, beginning to look at how we can begin to make change. And it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for those of us who feel like we have been victimized. And it's also uncomfortable for the people who feel as though they are complicit in some way. So there's no hiding, there's no pretending around it. It is uncomfortable, but it's just important. It has to be had.
Yeah. You've got groups, like ACSONI as well, which are doing great things for this country as well. So that's good to see.
And I think that word uncomfortable is interesting, Raquel. Like what type of reaction would you like people to have to both your respective works?
I would want people to be uncomfortable, and for that discomfort to cause them to look again. And once they look again, to think, okay, what am I going to do? What's going to be my responsibility? How am I going to make a difference? It's easy to just think, I'm just one small cog, I'll leave it to the big wigs or to the people with the power to make the change. But I think if every single individual takes responsibility for making a small change in their sphere of influence, that we can begin to make some significant progress. So in the Terra Nova piece, there is actually a form that follows it that invites people to commit to what they will do after watching the piece and to tell us about it. And I would love to hear, what are people being prepared to commit themselves to? What cost are we actually prepared to pay individually, personally, as well as then politically, to actually see racial injustice and reparations move forward?
Yes, and that injustice play is a very powerful piece of work. And I really love the contrast between obviously the person of color asking the questions and then the white person asking the questions. Just for that crossover, because there are questions that certainly I think about from a white person's point of view. And I wanted to ask Kieran kind of that same question about what reaction he wants within an audience, but probably add in sort of the caveat as he talks about this personal connection to his artwork, the subject that he paints. But Kieran, are you thinking then about what the audience reaction would be, or does that not even enter your head?
Definitely does, yeah. I like for my work to be kind of open and kind of be interpreted in any way as the viewer. It's going to be different to exactly the point that I'm putting across isn't always the point that's coming out the other side of the painting. So I do kind of like it to our open interpretation. But to have a much more of a broader message, though, yeah, I suppose with that, really what my work is kind of coming behind this kind of, and I have this mixed heritage as well. I think it's just those mix of different cultures, and it's actually really hard. I don't often think that. It's really hard to think what really I want to get across in my paintings.
I have one more curveball question for you, and it is.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Bring it on, he says. Bring it on.
Is how many wives does Henry VIII have? No, it's not. It's no, the question actually is what would success mean to you as an artist? If you want to think about it, I can pass it to Raquel in the meantime.
Success as an artist, would like to be internationally known. That would be nice. put a few things down on a list there, but I would like to just really don't want to be just put into one box really as well. So I know I do primarily oil paintings and that, but I think really success. I suppose it's what you're known for as well. It's kind of have a signature style without having to put my signature on a work for people to know exactly who painted it would be nice. Success, I don't want any fame or anything. Just in that way though is nice. Just so you know who's painted it. That'd be good. Other things to add there, yeah, be international and have not so much recognition. That is a really hard question, man. You've made me think. Whenever you air this, you can go back and edit it and cut out all those ums and ehs that I've been doing for the past 2 minutes as well. I'll type you an email response to that one.
It's okay. I can edit into the audio podcast then, that's fine.
Yeah.
And Raquel is a poet, and obviously Kieran's talked about not being pigeonholed into a box. You have lots of, as I said, creative strings to your bow. What would success mean to you then?
Yeah, I have to say that resonated when Kieran said that, because in so many different ways, I don't want to be pigeonholed into one box. I feel as though I have been blessed with many talents, and success for me, I guess, would be to make my maker pleased, to feel as though I have brought each of those talents as far as I can bring them, and to benefit others from the talents that I've had. This one little thought has come back to me repeatedly. I remember when I met quite an important individual in the arts world in Northern Ireland, and they asked me about the future. And immediately I said, I want to bring the African Caribbean arts community into the mainstream. And they said to me, one step at a time, get yourself into the mainstream, and then you can bring them on. And I thought, but I don't want to be the one in the mainstream before everybody else. I want us all to come together. I want us to emerge there together. So I suppose that is something that drives me as well. I don't feel as though I want to be there on my own. This concept of Ubuntu, community is key and core, and family is very deep for me. So just making it on my own is really just doesn't cut it. Yeah. So yeah, success would include that for me as well. Yeah.
And on the subject of the future, what future projects have you got in the pipeline?
Oh, well, I have been invited to Kurt International Festival. I'll be in Galway, hopefully in April of this year as a part of that festival. Hello, Kurt, looking forward to seeing you in Galway. I also will be hosting a performance poetry event at the John Hewitt Society, the John Hewitt International Summer School, and somebody else I know will be there too. I have also been invited to do my first dub poetry workshop at a festival over in Scotland. Details of that yet to be fine-tuned. I have submitted my first anthology for publishing, and I'm waiting to hear about that. I have a piece of work in Soundings, which is going out, I think, this week as a part, or maybe it has already gone out with Belfast City Centre, putting together pieces, I think, in connection with the quotidian, word on the street. And there was something else in my head there for a moment, but yeah, lots of bits and pieces going on in the background, and hopefully they'll all come together in the future soon.
I was fairly busy then, I've gathered. And then, Kieran, I know you've mentioned the collage work that you've been doing recently, and we saw a couple of glimpses of some of the smaller portraits. What other projects are you working on?
Yeah, so I'm trying to work quite smaller on my works now, because of course, I shipped that painting first time internationally to America, and that was quite a lot of hassle to try and get that shipped, to be honest, because it was that big. It was like nearly 2 meters, in diameter. So working smaller, making my work more accessible, and being able for more people to see it, being able to share it more, I think is kind of my aim over the next year.
And if people would like to check out some of your work, where can they do that?
Yeah, of course they can. On Instagram, I've got my website as well. Instagram is @harper.painting, and the website is www.kieranharper.com. I hope to be putting up my collages soon. It's about first time ever doing it as well. And that's it. Like I said, I don't want to be just known for one one thing, put in the one box kind of thing. So trying to do a lot more, very much into photography and videography as well. So that and the college is definitely a lot more things to be working on.
Excellent stuff. And then Raquel, where can people find out about you and your work?
Okay, now, like I said before, there are a few different aspects to it. So I've mentioned already about terranovaproductions.net/in-justice, where you can find the performance of Injustice, followed by the workshop, which takes a fulsome a short fulsome discussion about the piece and the issues related to it. But at the moment, I'm quite busy with a podcast with a group of ladies who are quite dear to me, called Unmute Now, and it can be found on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Unmute Now, or at Unmute Now 1 in one instance. I think on Twitter it's at Unmute Now 1. And you can hear episodes of our podcast there, where we talk about a number of issues that our communities very often don't get an opportunity to talk about. So our tagline says, raising the volume on whispered conversations in our communities. So there's a podcast, there's a performance Injustice, but if you want to hear pieces of my dub poetry or other forms of poetry and a little smattering of song, I have a YouTube channel at Raquel McKee, or just Raquel McKee on YouTube. I'm not so great with that side of it. So you can check out some of my work there if you're interested. And I have a few pieces published in a number of anthologies. There's, one anthology coming up soon as well that I will have some pieces in. So I'll be tweeting about those, so look out for it.
Thank you for that. And one last painting question, but this is not for Kieran. It's just to you, Raquel, about the painting behind you.
Oh, great. I love that you've done that. Thank you, Colin. That painting behind me is done by my sister-in-law, Catherine, and she does it mostly for fun, but every chance we get her to do more. So yesterday I got 2 pieces for my birthday. So very excited. Yeah.
It's a lovely birthday present. And
yes.
I think you're putting me to shame with the wardrobe behind me, and Kieran, who's actually in an art studio and didn't put up any artwork behind him. But
no, I didn't. There's no artwork in this whole studio. On some of the other walls, I'll say that they're that side. They're that side.
No worries.
But thank you both for that. And as we come to a close now, I would just like to once again thank Peter O'Neill and Imagine Festival for having us at this year's event, and to all the audience for joining us. Also, thank you to Accidental Theatre for hosting us. This is actually the last episode of the Duncairn Podcast for this series, and what a way to bow out. So the audio for this podcast, as with all the previous episodes, will be available on whatever streaming service that you listen to your podcasts on from next week. But my final and largest thank you go to the 2 artists, Raquel McKee and Ciaran Harper, for your time and for your chat and for your inspirational words. And I'll just finish with a quote that Raquel said, to be a better me. And I think from this talk, I think what we can take away is to try and be a better us, whoever that may be. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks again, Colin.